Hey everyone, I'm Scott Brandley.
And I'm Alicia Coakley. Every member of the church has a story to share, one that can instill faith, invite growth, and inspire others.
On today's episode, we're going to hear how one man's journey of faith has shown him that God is in relentless pursuit of us and will exhaust every possible measure to bring us back to Him. Welcome to Latter-day Lights. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Latter-day Lights. We're so glad you're here with us today, and we're really excited to introduce our special guest, Joe McCally, to the show. Joe, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you. I am so excited. We had your dad on a few months ago, and his story was just so beautiful, and it was so filled with the Spirit. And so when you reached out and you were like, I'm just feeling like I should tell you ours too, I was so excited. I love it because I feel like it kind of connects multiple stories together. You know, like I know you won't really be talking about the same things that your dad did, but just having like that knowledge of like where he came from and then knowing where you came from and whatever else, I think it's going to be a really good one. So I'm super excited to have you on and very, very thankful that you reached out to us today.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad I did, but it was more of my daughters said, Dad, you've got to tell your story. And especially since you did it, you got to do it. You got to tell your side of the story. And my oldest daughter always tells me that she loves my conversion story. Mm-hmm. And it's the best conversion story I've ever heard. In her words, is what she has told me. So, yeah, that's awesome. That's where it put me, is reaching out to you folks. And
yep. Awesome. Well, you mentioned you have at least 2 daughters. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I am the father of 4. I have 3 daughters. The oldest is 24. The twins, boy and a girl in the middle, are 20. And then the youngest is 19. Wow. The wife and I, for the most part, had almost 8 months of being empty nesters. Our youngest daughter took a job here in town and came back they all moved to Rexburg, Idaho. So to BYU, Idaho kind of thing. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at now. The twins are married, just celebrated a year. So the boy and the girl got married. And
like they're twins and they got married in the same year?
Yeah, the same year.
What are the chances of that?
Well, the son is about just shy of 2 hours older than his sister, but he got married a month or 2 after she did.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I bet your wallet didn't appreciate that very much.
Actually, it wasn't bad because we had a lot of volunteers. My wife is extremely creative, as well as her family is too, and everybody just pitched in, and it didn't really cost a lot, but it did cost something, so it worked out. However, my son, on the other hand, he decided to get married in Texas, and yeah, that was more expensive. So, and
where at in Texas?
What is that? Commerce, Texas. Okay. And which is I think it's northeast of Dallas, Fort Worth area.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Very cool.
When we went down there, we pulled the fifth wheel all the way down there. Was in the park, and a tornado hit in the area. So we thought, like, well, we're going to be like Dorothy, and we're not going to end up in Kansas anymore, kind of thing. It was rocking the RV and the fifth wheel, and it was interesting. The slide outs kept pushing and buffeting in with the wind and whatnots, but it didn't actually touch down exactly where we were, but we were getting the microbursts and the heavy winds while we were there. But the wedding was great. It was beautiful. I will never go back to Texas in the summer. That's when my son, wife now, decided to get married. humidity is terrible. All the wedding pictures, I am literally wringing wet. So my clothes are dark, and there wasn't an inch of me that wasn't covered in sweat. And I learned a new thing too while I was down there, that you get something that's called swamp fingers. Really like you've stuck your fingers in warm water and let them soak. And I told my daughter-in-law's uncle, I said, is this a normal thing? He goes, yeah, it's normal. We call it swamp finger, but just be careful when you grab onto something and twist, it'll rip your skin off. It's like, okay, that's good to know.
Yes, it can. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Well,
So what do you do for a living, Joe?
Well, I am an RN. I have been for the last 16 years. I just recently took a job with a community college doing nursing education. So it's just within the last couple of weeks. Last 3 weeks. I've been working as a clinical instructor for a community college in eastern Montana.
Nice.
Cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, been married for 25 years to the love of my life. Which is an interesting story that we'll get into later. It's part of the transition, or the story of my life, I guess, is how it's put. So
I love it. Well, I'm excited. So I want to hear more. Let's go ahead and turn the time over to you, and you can let us know where your story begins.
Sure. I guess we can go all the way back to the beginning. I was born in November of 1972, which is exactly just shy of exactly 1 year after my folks were married, which if you've listened to the podcast at all, you'd know his story. He got married in Idaho Falls in 1971, November, I believe it was 16th, and I was born the next year on the 9th of November. I am the oldest of Larry and Judy McCally. And for all intents and purposes, I had a normal childhood. I was raised and taught by goodly parents, as Nephi talks about, and sort of grew up in that 70s era where it's like you get told to go outside and play, and then the door gets locked behind you. Well, yeah, we survived from the garden hose and playing outside, and that's what we did. We were outside all the time. And I always really did enjoy that sort of normal childhood. I don't know why, but my mother and I have a very strong connection. I don't know if it was her deepest desire to have a boy or not, but I guess you could call me a mama's boy, but it doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm all of 6'1" and well over 300 pounds. And at one point in my life, I used to be able to bench press 625 pounds. So, it's just something.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Stripling warrior mama's boy, I think, is the term for that one.
Right. Which is funny. With that, being so connected to my mother, I'll tell a story on her. Growing up, of course, we had that wonderful connection, but one day she smacked me so hard she knocked a tooth out of my mouth.
Oh, no.
She smacked me so hard that a tooth fell out of my face.
Holy cow.
And
did you deserve it, though?
What's that?
Did you deserve it, though?
As Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story is I was sass-mouthing her, and she smacked me, but the tooth was already loose anyway. So, it's perspective. How you tell the story is how it's perceived. So when I start with,
right.
Mom hit me and she smacked me and knocked a tooth out of my face when I was young, But the rest of the story is, yes, I deserved it. So uh, just at the time growing up, I mean, as earlier I was talking with Scott, I from nowhere and everywhere all at the same time. And because we moved around, and I'm sure if you listen to Dad's story, you know that he worked for GM and he got moved around a lot. But at the time when I was first born, we lived in Oregon City, Oregon. And in Oregon City, depending on where you are, it's all on a hill. So you're either on hilltop and everything is downhill, or you live somewhere in between. So if you want to go up, it's always uphill or downhill. So for me, once I got to grade school age, it was a mile to the elementary school, and it was all downhill. No big deal, not a problem. But going home, it was all uphill, going back to the house. And it's not that, it was uphill both ways. No, it was downhill was going to, and uphill was coming back. And I really, during grade school, I absolutely hated the walk. It was a mile one way, and there was no bus, and we had to walk it. Rain, winter, sleet, kind of like the postal service, rain, sleet, hail, or it doesn't matter. You went. Mm-hmm. And not going to school was not an option, but Mom would kick us out of the house. She was a housewife, and that was a kind of a constant in my life, that Mom was always there, which later in life I came to appreciate. But when I would talk with friends, it's like, I don't want to go to my house, but they always wanted to come to my house because Mom was there, which is an odd scenario. But with that, having to go to school and walking back, one day while I was walking home, in my mind, I'm thinking and pondering, like, I hate this walk. Why do I have to walk this every day? I wish somebody would just stop and pick me up. And I was probably within a half a mile of being home, and this 1970s sedan pulled over and rolled down the window and said, "Hey, your mom sent me to pick you up. You want to ride?" And while I was standing there on the side of the road, hearing this gentleman, this man, which there was no one else in the car, say, come here, I'll give you a ride. Your mom sent me to come get you. That was sort of the beginning of hearing the Spirit talk to me and tell me. And during that interaction with that man, I clearly heard a voice say, "Do not get in that car." And then I thought, wow, well, maybe I should. Why not? But it was so powerful and so overwhelming. I heard it again. Do not get in the car with that man. And of course, I did listen to it. I like, thank you. No, I'm just right here. And no, he left. But that was like one of those times where the Lord reached out and said, "I'm going to protect you, and please listen to me." And at that time, I did listen to him. And honestly, I firmly believe, had I not listened to him, I probably wouldn't be here today. So it was pretty interesting.
I'm sorry, I was just asking, how old were you when that happened?
I was probably 6, maybe 7, about that time.
Wow.
Yeah, I started kindergarten when I was 5. Of course, because I was born in November, I would either be the oldest or the youngest, depending on when I start. So Mom started me at 5, and I was always the youngest, and all the way through school.
Wow. So, like, to remember that, like, I don't think I remember hardly anything when I was 6 or 7 years old, really. I mean, very, very little, but like that must have been a really big, impression, It was huge. And
a lot of my childhood memories I don't remember except for these spiritual high points. I suffer from sleep apnea and was undiagnosed until I was about 26. So a lot of my long-term memories when I was younger, I just don't have. But these high points, these high spiritual moments and significant events, I do remember quite well. Life progressed after that. It's best to describe it. He was a pedophile that was looking for his prey, and I happened to be on the road at that time. And I'm truly grateful that the Lord helped me in that situation, and especially truly grateful that I actually listened at that time. I don't always listen, as you'll see as my story progresses. But at that time I did listen, and I'm very grateful that I did. Later on, as I progressed through life, we still living in Oregon City. We moved to a newer house, which was probably 4 blocks away from the original house where we lived. And there was a deep canyon that was at the Oregon City High School. If anybody that listens to this has seen the old Oregon City High School, the football field is down in a deep canyon bottom and the steep cliff walls. Back in the practice field of that high school down in this canyon, there was an old growth pine tree up on one side of the canyon that had those big ropes that you kind of climb in gym class. And it shimmied up the tree and tied it off and had cut the branches all below that. And you could swing as a pendulum out across this big canyon. And at full swing of the pendulum on this rope, you were probably 4 stories off the ground. And I want to say I was probably 7, maybe 8. And I wanted to do it. I had done it a couple times, but I just, kind of, slow, didn't really get a good run at it. And finally built up the courage one time to get a good run at it and really swing out there. And as I hit the apex of the pendulum, I lost my grip. And that was the last thing that I remember at that point. Friends say that I ended up in the blackberry bushes down below, and that somehow I had gotten up and started walking home. I don't remember the walk until I got within 2 blocks of my house. There was a gentleman who I had never met, never seen before, and I never saw again, walking me home when I finally came to in my memory. And he got to the corner. He walked me to the corner where I would turn and head down to our house. And he said, "You can make it from here now." And then he turned and left, and it was gone. When I turned around, he was not there anymore. Was he one of the 3 Nephites? I don't know. But what I do know is I never met the man before. I never saw him again. And no sooner than he told me that I could make it from here. And I said, okay. And I started to walk. I took 2 steps, turned around to say thank you, and he was gone. There was nobody anywhere that I could see. So whoever it was, thank you. They got me back. And I didn't honestly break any bones. I didn't suffer anything that I know of. And life sort of progressed and went on from there. Then I got to 8 years old. I apologize. I keep looking, and I when I'm in deep thought, I look off into places that I shouldn't.
You're fine.
I got to about baptism age, which was 8 years old, and all things were set and ready, and I got baptized at 8, and I don't necessarily remember the the plunge, we'll call it, being baptized, but what I do remember is coming back out to be confirmed and hearing an audible voice tell me, you were tricked, which
Aw.
as life progressed, that you've been tricked put a lot of doubt and fear in my mind as I went along. I grew up in the church, so I had the fundamental basis of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But at my baptism, I fervently remember hearing that voice in my head saying that I was tricked, which sort of started me on a slight downhill spiral after baptism. Shortly after baptism, probably about 9 years old, was my first entering into trying tobacco, chewing tobacco like Copenhagen, snuff, and
Mm-hmm.
and the worst thing about it was I liked it, and I liked it a lot. So sort of this ebb and flow of my life of, as best could be described, a pride cycle. Things start going good. You know you're in the righteous position. Then things go good. You go, this isn't so good. Then the pride comes in, and it just this whole vicious circle of going round and round with my life. Dad always calls it riding the roller coaster of life, which it makes sense because there's moves and twists and ups and downs, and that was my life. So also around that time, of course, this was the late 70s ish, and pornography was harder to get than it is nowadays, where you pull up one of these little devices and it's instantaneous. I found a deck of cards that had pornographic pictures on them. And about 9 years old, I really started like, ooh, this is, that in psychology in college, they call it the rat brain, that fundamental, core ethos that's in the brain etiology. But that sort of started me on a, on again, off again, kind of wanting to see those pornographic pictures. In moving ahead into middle school, which, how old would I be in middle school? I just don't remember. So
usually 12-ish.
I was going to say, if someone wants to
to
be wherever that might be, about 12-ish, 11, 12. So it probably, for me, I would have been 11. Because like I said, I was always the youngest in school, is when I really got more into, I tried my first cigarette. I liked it too. So any tobacco products that I could get my hands on. And those were the days that you could forge a note that said, and run down to the grocery store, the pharmacy, and, well, grandma told me, give you this note and sell me cigarettes.
Yep.
It worked.
Yep.
We don't do
Yeah.
that anymore, but growing up, that's truly what they did. Because of all that sports and things that I did in my life, with powerlifting and wrestling and football, I have chronic pain in my joints. So I got to move a little bit. So I apologize if I'm making people dizzy as I go about here. So middle school happened, and about middle school is when, up until that point, Dad had been working for a local Chevy dealership in the Oregon City area. And right at middle school, I got the first year of middle school done. So where we were at, elementary school was kindergarten through sixth, and then middle school was seventh through eighth or ninth. I don't remember, because right at that time, after the first year of middle school there in Oregon City, Dad started with General Motors, and they transferred us up to Yakima, Washington. And in Yakima, they had middle school, but it was sixth, seventh, eighth, and then high school was freshman, on to senior. So the two different schools were kind of a little different. But that's when we moved to Yakima, Washington. And to say that I was a putz during those years is an understatement. I wasn't really a good kid, and I was seeking out pornography, seeking out alcohol, seeking out tobacco products, and it really got bad when we moved away from the core friends that I had, because in Oregon City, we had a lot of church members that were my friends. So I had sort of maybe I shouldn't be doing this kind of, what would you call that? Guide marker or guidepost or
Right.
peer group that helped to keep you on the straight and narrow, as it were.
Right.
So when we moved to Yakima, Washington, we moved into a kind of a rural area of farming that they had, and I really became not so good. I would stealing things, and of course the alcohol, and going to parties and getting drunk at 11, 12 years old. And at one point, and this has kind of been throughout my life, I would get into accidents, but I really wouldn't get hurt. And why the Lord has preserved me, I may never know until I actually go onto the other side of the veil. Why did you always keep me so protected that I didn't get seriously injured in my life? I was riding a three-wheeler at a drunk party in Washington, in middle school. And if anybody's ever been in around three-wheelers, they're kind of dangerous, a little tippy.
Oh, yeah.
I went over a jump, drunker than a skunk. My foot slipped off the foot peg, and my foot hit the ground. And of course, the rear tire ran over my foot and pulled me off of the three-wheeler. Of course, I was going as fast as the thing would go, and it drove my knee directly into the ground. And all it did was cut my pants a little bit and put a little cut in my leg. And it should have done more damage than that, because when I fell right onto my head. And of course, the tumbling that happens thereafter. Why I was preserved from any other harm, I don't know, but I guess God watches out for drunks and fools, and I was both. So we just half a semester or half a year into my freshman year in Yakima, Washington, of course, GM from Dad moved us back to Oregon. We moved into Willamette, Oregon, and I started attending the high school there, West Lynn High School. Still kind of off again, on again. Really didn't do much more alcohol when I left, but I still would have, the chewing tobacco, the snuff. At that time, I had been wrestling since I was about 6 years old. And so I got involved in wrestling and sports and football in high school as well. And kind of went through high school. I didn't have a whole lot of friends in high school. I was sort of a quiet, sort of a loner, as it were. But I did have two pretty decent friends. One that I still talk to this day. He's sort of my best friend, as it was in high school. And he and I got into a lot of different troubles in high school. What was it? I was 14 or I think I was 15 in high school. And I got involved in the Explorer Scouts and learned how to be a firefighter and EMS, first responder type stuff. I got certified as a firefighter and so on and so forth in my teens, and volunteered as well. Got involved in that and found it to be quite enjoyable, but still being connected and in the unrighteous desires of wanting to seek pornography and alcohol and tobacco. My senior year, I started every day with about half a mug of whiskey, bourbon whiskey, and coffee, and a cigarette before I would go into classes my senior year. My senior year was the year of I would call the mega putts, and gave up wrestling and football, which I wasn't always overly good at football. I mean, I was average. Wrestling, I was much better at. During my junior year, I qualified to go to state with wrestling. I got deathly ill with, I think, influenza, and had 2 matches at the state tournament and lost both of them because I was deathly sick. And then my senior year, like I said, the mega putts came out, and I basically told the coach to where to stick it and how the sun didn't shine where I wanted him to put it. Of course, I wasn't doing the things that I should be. I firmly believe that my high school diploma was a participation trophy. I think I did have one summer class after my senior year that I had to take, which was an elective, before they would actually give me my diploma for high school, which I studied industrial diesel mechanics at one of the skills centers there in outside of Westland, Oregon. I think it was in Clackamas. This part of the story of not really doing what you're supposed to do in high school comes to play when I get older and decide to go to college. When we were in Young Men, Young Women, we went on a whitewater rafting trip on the Deschutes River, and they have class 4, class 5. It's pretty intense whitewater rafting. And we got to a section in the river where you could get out and jump in out of the boat and jump in with your life jacket and float down and go through this little bit of a rapids. And everybody did it and been doing it for years. And so we did. We got out and we jumped in, we floated down. We were there, the entire Young Men, Young Women group, all day. I was there, and my younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me, was there as well. And while we were there, I kind of was like, no, I don't want to go another time. I'd already gone like 3 or 4 times. I was like, I don't want to do it. And so my brother said, well, I'm going to go do it. And he runs up and goes to the head of where you jump in and then float down. And the thought came to me, it's like, you should go anyway. So I did. I am like, whatever, I'll just go. So I ran up and jumped in. how many minutes after my brother had jumped in, I couldn't tell you. I want to say it's more than 5, maybe less than 15, somewhere in there. And when I did, I started floating down, and all of a sudden I got sucked in by this undertow. And as I went down, my feet kicked something that was human that was under the water. And I knew that my brother had gone before me. So what I did is I reached down between my legs and I grabbed the life jacket that he had on. And I squatted down, and with all my might and force, I lifted him up and shot my legs up, and I pushed him to the surface. And from what I can recall, he said when he came out of the water, his feet came up out of the water. I had forced him up so hard.
Wow.
And then, of course, I forced myself up as well and got out of that undertow.
Oh my gosh.
But for whatever reason, he was stuck and he was drowning in that river. Had I not listened to that thought of, hey, just go anyway, my brother would have drowned that day. And why I was able to find him or get sucked in and feel him, it was the strangest and oddest thing that could have happened. And of course, that was in my teenage years. After high school, I really didn't like living under my father's roof, and he said I needed to get a job or move out, and he wanted me to pay rent. And basically, I told him it'd be a cold day in hell when I pay him. So I left. Growing up, I always had heard vague stories of my grandfather, my mother's dad, that he was a cowboy, growing up. And I always wanted to learn who he was. I wanted to see who he was, but he died when my mother was 10. So I never really got to meet him. But I'd hear, generalized stories of how good he was with horses and training horses and so on and so forth from my grandmother, which is odd. I told you earlier how I had such a great, wonderful connection with my mother. Even to this day, I still call her the mother type unit. She takes it as a term of endearment. I just do it to try and annoy her, but she doesn't get annoyed because it's like, whatever. But I was raised with strong maternal influences in my life. I had my grandmother, my mom's mother, and my dad's mom that we spend a lot of time with throughout our growing up years. And I know that Dad talked about his mom and the service that she provided. My mother's mom, my grandmother, was the same. She was the epitome of service. She had nothing, but when she would get things that she would get donated to her, she would put it together and make things for Christmas gifts or for a gift for her grandkids. So she would end up getting like yarns of color that nobody wanted. So you'd have these very interesting color schematics of knitted or crocheted items that she would make and spend countless hours making. But it was odd colors. I mean, like purple and forest green and just things that people didn't really want. She could get for free and make these things for her grandkids. But, she was the one that was married to my grandfather, who was the cowboy.
Okay.
So always wanted to know who he was. And I always wanted to live that cowboy life. So after I graduated high school and basically told my dad to stick it, I left home in a 1961 GMC pickup that had a canopy on the back and a door at the back, and put my old twin size mattress in the bed of it, and an old Coleman cooler, and a little one burner Coleman stove, and all my clothes and blankets that I had, and I left and went to Montana. Drove around a lot looking for work, didn't really find anything. And this was sort of the path that had to humble me. And basically, at that time of many months of trying to look for work, I was bound and determined to do it on my own. I didn't want anything from my parents. I didn't talk to my parents. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them at this time. I was about 17, because that's when I graduated high school, 17, almost 18 years old. And so for all intents and purposes, I was homeless. I had the pickup, I had the canopy, and that's what I lived out of. And to save money, I would only got to the point that I would only eat about a half a can of pork and beans, because you could get them for 15, 20 cents a can. But I'd eat half of one a day so that I'd have enough to get through the week, doing odd things to try and get some money. But basically homeless, trying to find work. And of course, it humbled me enough that I finally did call home, and Dad said, have you tried, at the time, I think it was called LDS Employment Services. I reached out. I was humbled enough that I reached out and found some work in Montana where I was. And I ended up in Helmville, Montana, found a job and started working. After the first week there, they had a branding at the end of that week. The neighbors came to help, like all brandings happen. The neighbors come and they help, and everybody just helps each other during that branding time, because it's a lot of work, and it's not easy work. And apparently I impressed some of the neighbors, so much so that after the second week of working on this ranch hay farm, I was told to go disc this field and prepare it for planting of new alfalfa growth. And I worked late into the night, and I disked the entire field and got all the clods broke down, and it was prepped and ready to go. And so I spent countless extra hours, thinking I was doing a good job, trying to put in that extra mile, to prove that, hey, I'm a good employee, And we showed up at the end of that week. I think it was a Friday, and the boss every morning would say, hey, I want you to go down to here and do this. And he just sort of divvied up what he wanted us to do for the day. And he pointed at me and said, I want you to go back there and disc it. And I said, well, sir, I worked late last night and I got it all done. And he said, what are you trying to do? Work yourself out of a job? You're fired. And fired me for working extra. So there I was. I had to leave, homeless again. But I did have a little cash in my pocket. And I happened to stop at the local bar, which has a cafe. I wasn't actually drinking at that time. I ordered a hamburger and was sitting there having a hamburger for lunch. I'd been out driving that morning looking for work, and one of the local ranchers that had been there to help with the branding started talking with me, and he said, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you got fired. A lot of people get fired. We don't know what's wrong with this guy. He's a new boss for this company ranch that I was working at, and nobody likes him locally, is what he said. But he said, I was super impressed with how you were working that day when we came out there to brand. And I want you to use my name and just tell. And he told me his name. I don't remember it, but he said, use my name, and I want you to go to the Big Hole. And he told me how to get there. And he said, you go to some of those ranches and you use my name as a reference, and you go work down there. You're too good to work here. You need to go down there. I firmly believe that he was divinely inspired to tell me to go down to the Big Hole, because this is where the story kind of gets a little interesting, at least for me and my family, because I took his advice. I wrote down his name and went to the Big Hole. And I ran into some people in the Big Hole, got to talking with them, and they said, you know what, we'll help you. They bent over backwards to help me to find a job while I was down there in the Big Hole. And the next day, I found a job working on the Huntley Ranch. And I'd been working on the ranch probably for 2 or 3 weeks. And the whole time I was there on that ranch, every hill that I crested when I would go out on horseback to go check fence, or to go check these cows, or to go irrigate some field, something about every part of that ranch that I went to seemed so very familiar to me, almost like a deja vu kind of interesting plight. And I mean, I would crest, it's like, why is this so familiar to me? And after about 3 weeks, I wrote a letter specifically to my grandmother, my mom's mom, and told her, I said, hey, just letting you know, I'm in Montana, I'm working on, the Huntley Ranch and so on and so forth. And the story that I got back that ties all this together is Mom said that my mother was sitting with Grandma as she was reading this letter. And she said she almost fell on the floor. And my mother asked my grandma, I was like, well, what's wrong? What's going on? She goes, you don't understand. And this is where she wrote back to me and told me what I'm about to tell you. The ranch that I was working on, not only was my grandmother born and raised in the town, which was just a few miles away from this ranch, but my grandfather, my grandma's husband, worked on that very same ranch. Not only did my grandfather, but my great-grandfather worked on the same ranch for the same people that I was now working for.
Wow. That's cool.
So it's one of those tender mercies of the Lord that allowed me a righteous desire to be met and to meet, and at least walk in his footsteps, to know who my grandfather was. And it was such an amazing story in there to really dive into that history. Grandma sent me some snap photo picture books, and that she didn't know who these people were. So what I did is I took them to the guy that owned the place, and he had inherited from his father, and his father was the one that my great-grandfather and grandfather worked for. But the man I was working for, he looked, I said, can you take a look at these pictures and see if you recognize any of these people? And we went through this entire, it was pretty thick picture book. And he said, oh yeah, I know that guy. And he would tell me stories about that person and who their name was and so on and so forth. And he even remembered a story of my great-grandfather that he said, I remember him. I remember coming to the cookhouse, and he was a big, burly man. He was huge, at least to my eyes, as this, his name was Clayton. The owner of the ranch was telling this story to me. He said, I remember him. He'd come in, and when he would sit down, it felt like the earth moved. Of course, he was a kid at the time. And he said he had one rag to wipe the sweat off of his head and one rag to wipe his mouth. Just these little snippets of someone else's life that no one knew before, and being allowed to have that journey in there. While I was there, I was trying to kind of get my life in order. I hadn't been looking at pornography. I hadn't been seeking out any of that. And I was trying to get away from tobacco. And I had stopped any alcohol that I had been doing. And one night while working on that ranch, two of the other ranch hands wanted to go to town and get drunk. So they asked me if I'd be the designated driver, because they had known that I was staying away from alcohol. So I agreed, and I drove them into town in one of the ranch hands' pickup. It was an old, either 77 or 78 Ford F-250 pickup. And you've ever seen the mirrors on the side that those year pickup has? You either had these ginormous moose ears or antlers on them, or you had this tiny little mirror probably about this big that stuck out from the side of the vehicle, maybe 12 inches, maybe. And any closer and you'd be touching the side of the vehicle. The reason I described that so well is when I took these two gentlemen in, drove them in. The guy that owned the pickup drove us in, and I was going to drive them back. I got tired of waiting, and the more drunk they got, the more belligerent, it's like, I don't even want to be here. So I told them, it's like, when you're ready to go, find me on the road. So I'm going to start walking back to the ranch, why I decided to do that, I don't know. It was probably not the smartest thing in the world to do, because the ranch from town was probably about 20 miles. And so I was walking back. It's late at night. It's dark. And I hear, if you've ever heard a 460 Ford motor come rumbling and roaring at you, you kind of remember it. You know what it sounds like. And I'm just walking on the shoulder of the road, on the right-hand shoulder of the road. And I figure they're going to stop. They're going to see me. They're going to stop. I didn't really bother to look behind me. And that's when that mirror I described, the outermost part of it, hit me at highway speed at the back of my left arm as I was walking on the side of the road. And that's how literally close to death I was by getting hit and struck by this vehicle driving down the road by a drunk cowboy. Apparently, it busted the mirror off. They heard it, or their words were, well, we heard some kind of noise, so we stopped and we backed up to see what was going on. Of course, I used some colorful metaphors and told them how stupid they were. And the get-go took us out of the driver's seat, and I'm going to drive. So then we went back to the ranch, and that was kind of the end of that story. But
was your arm okay?
Surprisingly, yes. I think I was more mad and didn't realize how, it just slapped me in the back of the arm at highway speed. So I really didn't. And I don't recall if it hurt the next day. I really don't. But at the time, I couldn't say that I noticed it and that it hurt, other than it hit me in the back of the arm.
Okay.
Yeah. So kind of during that time, because I was trying to get my life in order and all the good things that had been happening to me at the ranch there, I started the process to submit my missionary papers. And
Okay.
so I moved back home to my folks' place for a very short time. And I did the medical physical and kind of started the paperwork. And then that voice of "you've been tricked" came back to play. And
Okay.
so I ran away from that. "You've been tricked" sort of came back. And I fully listened to it this time. And it's like, I am not going on a mission. And I left. And I went back to Montana to different ranches and got into sexual sin with women and pornography and alcohol and tobacco. Getting so belligerently stinking drunk, going into the town pump, standing there in one of the aisles looking at the beef jerky. And then the next thing you remember is sitting on top of the cigarette case that was behind you, that you had literally passed out and fell backwards into the cigarette case. It was an interesting fall, really, of trying to go as far away from the teachings and gospel of Jesus Christ as I possibly could.
Can I ask real quick, when you twice now you've heard this voice at big times in your life where you were going to be doing something, getting baptized, going on mission, things like that. Did the voice feel or sound different to you than what like those other times were? Like, do you remember thinking like, oh, this sounds the same as everything else, or did you not really pay attention?
I would probably have to say I really didn't pay attention to how it sounded. Sometimes that's a difficult question. I really more along the lines of I really didn't pay attention, other than hearing the voice say, you were tricked. I'll have to really think about that more. And but yeah, can't say that I noticed any difference.
Right. Well, because like I know, it reminds me of like when Joseph Smith was praying, in the grove, right? Like he was praying, he was asking for answers and things like that. And Satan intervened, right? Like Satan tried to stop that from happening. And so it very much feels the same as you're talking about this, but I can see how that could have been really disheartening and really confusing, especially if you weren't expecting any type of like oppression or any type of, walls to be standing in your way there. So I was just curious, kind of like to.
Yeah, it seems like you were trying to do what was right.
Which is funny, and not funny, haha, just an odd coincidence. Now that you mention that, there has been times, not only, sometimes it's not always the voice that I hear, but there has been times like when Joseph Smith talked about it, when a dark force came over him, so much so that would bind him and his tongue. I felt that probably 4 or 5 times in my life, where a dark physical force would literally pin me to the bed and bind my tongue to where I could not speak or utter words. The first few times that it happened, it was extremely frightening. I didn't know what to do or how to get out of this, and eventually I did. But after about the third time, it almost became a nuisance to me, to where now, if it does happen, and it hasn't happened in many years, where that, and it's like you said, during those pivotal moments in my life that something happens like this, to where that dark force tries to stop me from whatever I'm trying to do or going, down that road. And now it's more of a, all right, get thee behind me, Satan. I'm sick of this crap. Go, you know. But I have felt that same force that Joseph Smith has. And like I said, the first time that I felt it, it was extremely, very worrisome to me at the time. After, I want to say probably about 5 or 6 years of cowboying and working on different ranches, the desire that was in me to have a family was always there. I knew I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a family. And so, knowing that ranching really didn't pay a whole lot, I decided to start driving truck over the road. And I moved back to Oregon and got hired on with a trucking company that drove truck over the road. And this is where I really fell into a lot of pornography and sexual sin and alcohol and tobacco. So much so, when I was driving truck over the road, case in point, I'm not proud of this. I've told this story that I'm relaying to you, to my kids, to try and help them to know how bad it can be. More of a warning voice for them. But when I was driving truck over the road, kind of towards the end of when I really, it's like, you know what, I can't keep driving truck over the road anymore. I'm going to go down a road that I don't want to go down. I was sitting late at night at a truck stop and sitting in the cab of the truck and had the CB tuned to the channel that you could get a date for the night, as it were, prostitute, and had the microphone to the CB in my hand and was almost ready to call out, have one of these ladies come to my truck. And for whatever reason, I didn't. But that's how close to falling down in that pit, in that abyss, that darkest of hours, kind of hole, that's how far I had fallen from being born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and having that light basically from birth, and all these different miracles throughout my life of God's tender mercies, and still being that prodigal son, as it were, and just going down that road of dread. And one positive that did come out of driving truck over the road is I drove through Central Oregon, Bend, Redmond area quite a bit when I was driving, and I just this impression, this thought of, this is beautiful. I want to live here. This is where I want to move to. So I quit driving truck over the road and I started working, running heavy equipment. So excavators, motor graders, bulldozers, front end loaders. And you're going, how did you learn how to do all this? Mechanical things have always come easy to me, but working on the ranch, they had bulldozers, they had backhoes, they had front end loaders.
Oh, yeah.
So you had to learn. And of course, it was interesting to me. And after I got married, I had told my wife, it's like, I got the greatest job in the world. I get paid to play and dig holes in the dirt all day long, which, just a big old kid. But I wasn't married at that time when I first moved to, I moved to Lapine, Oregon, and started working for a construction company running heavy equipment. And going from the shop of where the construction company was and where I found a log cabin that I lived in on the Little Deschutes River there in Central Oregon, just south of Sun River, Oregon. And it's Sun River, if anybody's ever heard of, is quite a vacationer's playground, as it were, in Central Oregon, just south of the Newberry Crater, which is a lot of, volcanic activity was. And so there's cinder buttes and all sorts of different volcanic geological anomalies that happened in that area. But anyway, in driving from the cabin that I lived in to work, it just happened to be one of the roads that drove past one of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints church buildings there in Lapine. And every time I drive past it, coming to and from work, it's like, maybe I should go stop. I mean, I was still doing pornography or viewing pornography, still drinking alcohol, still doing tobacco things, products. And just like, maybe I should just stop. Maybe I should stop. And this went on for a couple of months. And finally, I built up the courage to stop in to the church building. And happened to be a Sunday that the stake presidency was there. And this building, if you've ever seen like a branch building where the cultural hall, the gym, basketball court, and the chapel are all one, it's all carpeted. It's a smaller building. It was an interesting design they did in the 90s. And it had, the partitions and dividers. You could divide it off, but half of it was a basketball court and the other half was kind of the chapel, but it all connected. And when they had sacrament meeting, they would open up all the dividers. They'd have chairs, down on the gym floor that you could see up to the podium and where the choir and the bishopric and everybody would sit. And the day that I decided to come, the stake presidency for that stake was there. And the meeting was like, I don't remember any spectacular anything that was said in any of the talks that happened that day. But when the meeting was over and the prayer was done, I got up and I was bound and determined never to come back again. It's like, I don't care. This is not what I want. And in that type of church building, the hallways run parallel, kind of like all church buildings. They have hallways on the outside of the gym, cultural hall, as you call it. I watched as I was walking out the back door, because I sat in the back. I came in a little late and I just snuck in and sat in the back. As I was getting up and heading out the back of this cultural hall, I watched the stake president literally run from the podium, down the stairs, out the door, and down the hall. And before I could get out of the cultural hall into the hallway, he caught me in the hallway. I will always remember his words. He said, "I've heard that you've been away for a long time. Welcome back." And then he reached out and gave me one of the biggest hugs I've ever had in my life.
Aww.
And he literally melted my stone heart and started me on the path to returning to the gospel of Jesus Christ. President Chastain was his name. He's long since passed away, but what an amazing man to just be so in tune to the Spirit, to be able to say what was needed to be said to melt a stone heart of a young man that thought this was never going to happen for him.
That was like a critical turning point then, right? I mean, you were basically walking out the door, never coming back.
Yeah, it was absolutely pivotal. Apologize. I'm not crying. My eyes are sweating.
It happens.
I tell people, it's like, I ain't crying. My eyes are sweating. Yes, it was absolutely pivotal. And that was the catalyst that turned my life around within a very short time. I didn't have a large library of pornography movies at the time that was VHS. But I took any remnants of the pornography that I had and I set it on a stump and I took a sledgehammer to it and destroyed it all. I stopped alcohol and tobacco that very same year. I stopped drinking coffee. All of it in that very same day. Which is odd. The addiction for tobacco is strong. Because when I talk about Copenhagen chewing tobacco or snuff, my mouth begins to water even to this day. And I haven't had any tobacco products in, married to the wife 25 years, so 26 years. I have not had any tobacco.
Dang.
And which is funny, because from that pivotal moment to coming into, more modern times now, there's been pivotal moments where I know somebody somewhere is praying over my name for a calling. Those desires of certain things that I used to do sort of rear their ugly head, and it becomes very difficult at those times. But I still remain strong. I don't fall back into those practices. But it's a constant battle. It never goes away. It's something that you live with and combat the rest of your life. At least so far, it's been that way for me. So I got my life in order. I was 24, 25, somewhere in there. And a young single friend from that ward, the Lapine ward, came to me one day and says, "Hey, I need a ride. I want you to go with me to the young single adults FHE, family home evening. But it's in Bend, and you got to give me a ride." I don't want to go. But I relented and said, "Fine, I'll take you, but I'll sit in the parking lot." Got there, and it's like, "No, you got to come in with me." Okay, fine, I'll go in. So and of course it was a stake center where they had family home evening with the young single adults. And I was a wallflower. I sat up on the stage and was like, yeah, I don't want to do this monkey business. They'd have activities, volleyball and basketball and all sorts of different things that they would do. And I think I'd been going there, taking my friend a couple of weeks. And this beautiful young lady walked up to me as I was sitting on the stage, and she said, "Hey, a bunch of us are going down to the Sherry's restaurant after, FHE. You want to come? We just, have fries and maybe a milkshake or something. We just sit and talk and just sort of have fun. You want to come?" I said, "Okay." That was the first meeting I'd ever met who later became my wife. And we talked a lot, even after the main group left the Sherry's restaurant. We spent a lot of hours talking. So I invited her and her friend to go out to a restaurant, it's called the Cowboy Dinner Tree. They're in Central Oregon, which all they have is steak or half a chicken. And the steak it's more of a roast than it is a steak. And all the accoutrements, it's kind of set in the Old West kind of motif. You still get the pie tin plates, and biscuits. It's really, really good. And I offered to pay for her and her friend. We went out there. I really didn't think anything of it. Nothing was even thought of. I was just trying to be nice. My wife would probably skin me for this, but I kind of was more interested in her friend. But it's odd how it had worked there. I mean, I was getting back into the church. I was trying to do the right things. I'd been conversing with Dad a lot during that time, telling him, my righteous desires of wanting to have a family, and I wanted to get married, and I wanted to, all these good things. And, he told me, he said, "I promise you, just pray about it and work as if it all depends on you, but pray as if it all depends on him." And so I did. I invited both of them, my wife, who is my wife now, wasn't at the time, and her friend, to come to a service project that I was doing for a family in my ward. I had rented a D4 cat and was going to clear a bunch of land and trees and lodgepole pines off of their property. Only Melissa, my now wife, showed up. And as I was working and running the bulldozer, she was out there with this family, and she was working hard. And every time I'd, move that D4 coming back, I'd see her out there just working hard. And like, man, that's one amazing woman. She's a hard worker, and just seeing her there working during this project got done. I invited her on an official date. We went to the movies, and after one official date, the spirit was unmistakable that I had to ask her to marry me. So after a whirlwind courtship of about a week, I asked her to marry me.
Oh my gosh.
And after about a month and a half, we were married in the Seattle Temple. And
dang,
that was another high pivotal point in my life, to have seen how far into the abyss I was, to be on this high spiritual mountain of kneeling across the altar in the house of God and having the Holy Spirit of promise reach down and touch me as I held her hand across that altar so powerfully and so strong that even someone who, as I told you earlier, used to bench press 625 pounds shook me to my core of witnessing to me that this was the woman that was to be my wife and was willing to be my companion throughout all eternity. To say I loved her then is an understatement, because the love I thought I had for her then pales in comparison to the love that I've learned from her after 25 years and going strong of, being married to this woman. We have 4 beautiful children that are just as ornery. And of course, if you ask her, she'd say, no, they're your children, not your fault.
Exactly.
My mother-in-law doesn't call it orneriness; she calls it determinedness. I'm determined. So, yes, my wife is very determined. She puts me in my place, and of course, I do need it at times. Sometimes it's received well, other times not so much. We laugh and joke. She will have disagreements, and I'll realize very quickly that I was wrong, and I'm not afraid to go to her and apologize the minute I know that I've screwed up. And she goes, I just want a minute to be more mad at you for a little while longer. But I mean, she's such a beautiful and creative individual. I mean, so, we got married, and we went from the Seattle Temple. We spent the night in a hotel that our parents had got for us, and then we immediately went onto our honeymoon onto the Oregon coast. We stayed in a bed and breakfast, which I'm going to tell a story on myself here. While there at the bed and breakfast, the lady was very proud of her food, and she would say, "Oh, there's these sun-dried tomatoes and this fancy crap and this and that. And is there anything else that you would like?" "Yes, can I have some ketchup?" And you'd have thought I'd asked something very inappropriate. But that's just who I am. It's like, don't tell me all this fancy crap. I don't care. Which seems odd now, because I'm not necessarily into the really fancy stuff, but I call myself an amateur barbecue pitmaster. My kids tell me, "No, Dad, you're a pit master. You are good at what you do." Just a lot of learning YouTube videos, as well as PBS movies on barbecue and such. And my wife's father, believe it or not, was sort of born and raised in the South, and he and I bump ideas and recipes for barbecue off of each other, even to this day. But while we got done with the honeymoon, then we had a belated reception, and the reception was like fine, whatever. It was a reception. It was fun. We had laughed, we joked, but a miracle happened that day. My wife's grandfather, who has since passed away, and of course his lovely bride is now passed away as well. But he suffered, when my wife and I first met, he had suffered for many years with asbestosis, which he was in the naval shipyards and got exposed to asbestos, and he suffered very heavily with respiratory problems. And I was witness to my father-in-law and brother-in-law, and because my wife's grandfather was in his vehicle, basically an absolute respiratory failure, not being able to breathe, at the point of ready to call an ambulance, I watched my father-in-law give him a priesthood blessing. And then I watched him stand up, my wife's grandfather, and go back into the reception and dance with his wife.
Wow.
He was an amazing man. My wife's grandfather, even my father-in-law, he's an amazing man. He has an amazing conversion story, which I don't want to tell his story, but it's amazing. So after that, just life happens. We got married, we moved in together, and very quickly kept getting these impressions: you need to start your family. You need to start your family. And I told the wife this, and we had planned, like, no, we'll wait, a year before, starting our family. And of course, we've only known each other for maybe 2.5 months at this time when we're starting out. Maybe 3 months when I started getting these impressions that we should start our family. And she kept saying, no. But that impression continued to, it's like, you need to start your family. So I said, well, let's go to the temple. So we went to the Portland, Oregon temple, and we did a endowment session. And as we were sitting there in the chapel prior to going to do the endowment session, she leaned over and said, all right. I said, what? We need to start our family. So we did. That was 1999. And in almost a year later, from when we got married to when our oldest daughter was our oldest daughter was born, was about a year later. So we had our first child in 2000. And on the day that she was born, I had been working in Great Falls, Montana for a construction company. And I had just started it, had been working there for about a month and a half. My wife stayed with her folks in Central Oregon because that's where her doctors were, and she had family to help her through the pregnancy. And the day came for my daughter to be born, and so I hopped on a flight and flew into Redmond, Oregon, and I didn't quite make the birth, but I was there very closely after. I had it all set up with my boss that, hey, my wife's pregnant. When she gives birth, I'm going to do this, and here's exactly the itinerary. He said, not a problem. You just let us know and you can go. So the minute I knew that I had to fly out, I told him, informed him, it's like, hey, everything that I talked about and prearranged here, it's happening now. The day that my wife was discharged from the hospital, which was like a day or two later, we went back to my in-laws' house, and we were struggling with the whole breastfeeding problem, that my wife just not able to do that. So we were new parents. We were scared. We didn't know what was going on. We listened to the lactation nurse at the time, and we were struggling with this new child. And then I got a phone call and I got fired. Even though I'd prearranged to have it, it just another kick in the shorts to basically probably humble me for some reason. But we got through that, lived life. trying to live the gospel and follow the teachings of Christ and do the things that we should, we felt impressed that I should go back to Montana and find other work, which I did, which got me closer to something else. And we ended up moving back to Oregon. And I started working for a construction company there, and really had been getting tired of being laid off and knew that I had this brand new child and not wanting to be laid off in the every winter and having to go through that financial struggle. But I should probably back up just a little bit. When we were in Great Falls, Melissa and our oldest daughter, Emma, moved to Great Falls with me. And there was a set of sister missionaries that it seemed that they were at our house a lot. But Sister Anderson and Sister Karchner, in the Great Falls area, for some reason, it wasn't the greatest of missions for sisters for some reason. I don't know why, but they would come to where we lived and they'd spend time with my wife. And honestly, I think the reason that these sister missionaries really didn't have a whole lot of proselyting things to do was to be there to help my wife through this transition of being a brand new mother. They were a godsend, and they, Sister Anderson, even later years, moved in with us for a while as she was trying to get her life in order after she got off her mission. And she's a interesting lady, to say the least. So, I mean, it was odd. I mean, I used to joke about it, and it's like, I'd come home, it's like, "Hi, hon, how you doing? Oh, hi, Sister Anderson, how are you?" House full of women here. So it was interesting at best. Let's put it that way. It was fun. They were great missionaries. They were great people. So so we did end up moving away from Great Falls and moving to Oregon. And during that time, just life things happening, and all for the positive. I mean, you can't always be exuberantly happy 24/7. There's ebbs and flows and whatnots. I started working for the highway department, which was, to me, and having discussion with my wife, would give us a more year-round solid base of employment, and which brought us to getting hired on with the highway department and then moving to La Grande, Oregon. And after about 3 years of working for the highway department, just pondering it at night, during the graveyard shift of plowing snow and keeping the Ladd Canyon there in Eastern Oregon open during the drifting and blowing snow. It's like, this is not what I want to be when I grow up. And the more that I pondered and the more that I thought during that time, I knew that when I was a teenager, I really enjoyed the EMS, doing the firefighting things and doing that sort of medical stuff. But I also knew that paramedics didn't make a whole lot of money. So the thought came to me, why don't you be a nurse? So, okay. All right. At 31 years old, I've now got one daughter that's 4 years old. And now I got a set of twins that are on the way. They're still baking in the oven, as it were. And I decided to start nursing school, or start to get the prerequisites so I could attend nursing school. And this is where the trophy diploma, the participation trophy diploma from high school comes into play. I ended up having to take no less than 26 credits or more every term from summer of 2004 until I graduated the summer of 2008, just to make up and get myself into a position where I could understand what was going on in college.
Were you working at this time too?
Luckily, this is where stories kind of converge with Dad's story and mine. I ended up not having to work, but my full-time job was college. And during this time is when my grandfather, my dad's dad, moved into that apartment that he built over his house that he talked about. And because of the money that his pension and everything that got paid to Grandpa, Dad didn't need it. So that extra money helped to pay for the minimal amount of mortgage that I had on a house that I was living in, and provided a place for my family to live that I didn't have to worry about. And of course, we were on food stamps and other things because I was unemployed and attending college. But that's where another side of the miracle of my grandparents kind of comes into play. Because without the little bit of money that Grandpa's pension had truly paid for a place for us to live, even though he was living with my folks, which is, here's an anecdotal sidebar note to Grandpa living over the garage in his apartment in my folks' place. They had a CCTV cameras in his apartment so they could, kind of keep an eye on him in different areas. Mm-hmm. We called it Grandpa Vision. That's what we called it. But my wife and I, up until this point, we'd come visit my folks, and we would take care of Grandpa while Mom and Dad would go off and do things. He's just a funny little dude that blind and had dementia, and it was entertaining. He had these funny little quirks that he would do, like we'd sit down to feed him, and he'd go, and it'd be some kind of meat product or a soup that had some meat in it. He's like, "Oh, meat." He just, these cute little things that he would do. And it's like, "Hey, Grandpa, you tell me you're full." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm so full, I can't eat another bite." It's like, "Well, we got some chocolate cake, Grandpa. You want some chocolate cake?" "Oh, there's always room for chocolate cake," he'd say. So, kind of hilarious to, he was happy in his little bubble, and Dad was right. He put these rails, and you'd hear him talking to himself, like, "I wonder where this rail goes," and he'd follow it. Like, "How did it know I wanted to go here?" It was just funny to see, even from my standpoint, even my kids to this day, like my oldest daughter, she goes, "Oh yeah, I remember watching Grandpa Vision," and Grandpa Vision. So,
well, that's cool.
Yeah. So, attended nursing school. I started at a community college, got a year under my belt, then transferred to Eastern Oregon University, and finished my prerequisites. After my second year of college, applied for nursing school, which was Oregon Health Science University, OHSU, which is pretty big medical facility and education for all things medical. Doctors and dentists, and it's huge in Portland metro area. But they had a satellite campus on the campus of Eastern Oregon University, and I applied for that. And I know the Lord had his hand in it. I was accepted immediately. And when I started college, the wife said, "You got 4 years. That's all you get." And especially during that time, taking so many credits to try and get it all done, truly doing in 4 years what normal people would probably do in 6 or 7 years. That's just how heavy a load that I had to do because of how stupid I was in high school. There's no mincing words in that. I was an absolute moron, mega putz in high school. So I graduated college with a 3.5 GPA. So I did something right.
Right.
And, before graduation, I told the wife, it's like, I'm moving back to Montana. We have to move to Montana. We got to. And bless her heart, she said, okay, but I'm not moving there until you have me a house. I said, okay, we can do that. But I also had to promise her when we did move, this was the last move, at least until all the kids had graduated high school. And of course, I had held that into the bargain. So I graduated nursing school. I had to take the state boards, the national boards, actually, the NCLEX, which is a huge nursing test. It's the final exam. You can graduate nursing school and have a bachelor's of science in nursing, but still not be an RN. But I passed the NCLEX boards and got my RN license. And by the time that I graduated college, when we started college, I had basically 3 kids, 1 that was born and 2 that were on the way. But by the time I graduated in that 4 years, we had our 4th child, our youngest daughter, which is kind of an odd, funny story. When we went in for the ultrasound of the twins, the tech was counting heartbeats, and we knew that multiples was a possibility because from our oldest daughter to the twins is a 4-year gap. And so she was on fertility drugs to try and have the next set of, kids. So multiples was a possibility, a high probability. And so we were in the ultrasound and they're counting heartbeats. The tech was like, 1, 2, and I could hear her muttering under her breath, 1, 2, uh-oh. Move the ultrasound probe some more, 1, 2, uh-oh. Wait a minute. What is this? Uh-oh. Oh, 3 technicians later, finally they got the supervisor in there and they're like, listen, ladies, wait a minute. You're counting this heartbeat twice. So we actually, up until that point, we thought we were having triplets, but it was just twins. So we assumed that the next child would be just as difficult. But she's an ornery little turd. We love her. She's very talented, our youngest daughter. But she was born 13 months almost exactly to the day that the twins were born. The twins were born on, the 23rd of April, 2004. And in May 22nd of 2005, our youngest was born. So even the scare of triplets was still like raising triplets because they were so close together.
Right. Yeah.
Man.
Which put together the whole empty nest when, I mean, it was like the twins graduated high school, and then the very next year we were planning another graduation, and she graduated, and everybody poof, whoop, just that fast was gone.
Wow.
We were
Yeah. I know, man. It goes by so fast. It just feel like the snap of a fingers, and you're like, your kids are all grown up and they're getting married and moving out, and you're like, wow, that was way faster than I thought.
Yeah.
So, it's been one wonderful ride. I mean, from that pivotal moment of that stake president catching me in the hallway until this very day, I've been a nurse for the last 16, going on almost 17 years. I started off thinking that I wanted to be a NICU nurse because of it was a traumatic, an emergency C-section for my youngest daughter because her cord prolapsed. So they had to emergency take her. So she spent the night in the NICU. And of course I was going through nursing school, and it's like, what do you want to do? Seeing the way that the NICU nurses worked on my daughter, and it's like, that's what I want to be when I grow up. So I did do a little bit of NICU training. I never did get hired into the NICU, but I did stick with pediatrics. I moved to Montana, got hired with one of the local hospitals, and spent the next 5 years doing pediatric surgical, as well as I'll call it perioperative surgical. I only very rarely would I go into the operating suite to help out. This most post-operative surgical that I did for 5 years. I've worked basically from cradle to grave. I was a hospice nurse in there for a large chunk of time in the last 16, 17 years. And I'm at the point now where I was glutton for punishment. I decided to go back to nursing school and go to graduate school to get my master's of science in nursing education and try and give back to the nursing community. And within the last 3 weeks here, I started working at a community college here in eastern Montana. And I work as a clinical nursing instructor now, and in probably, I think they said next summer, possibly next fall, I'll be hired on full-time permanent as a faculty nursing instructor, so professor type. And that's sort of brings us to today. I mean, I've since that day where President Chastain reached out and gave me that hug, I have had callings in the church with the young men. I've been an elders quorum president. I have been a ward finance clerk. And most recently, within the last year, I was called to be second counselor in the bishopric in our ward here in Shepherd, which is what I came running from as soon as we were done today to have this interview. So,
Nice.
Wow.
So from teenage turd to just really stalwart in the gospel. What a change.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked back and thought about like why you got those voices that you'd been tricked? Have you ever like thought about why that happened or what your life would have been like if that didn't happen?
Not as much as I should, but I kind of look back reminiscently on it as that was the journey that I was called to make. And there was a reason for why I went down that path because there was a lot of people, even in the darkest abyss, that I would run into. Case in point, there was a young man that I ran into during my dark times, that he was even in a more darkest a time of his life, that he was contemplating suicide. And just through conversation of talking with him, and it's odd. It's kind of like President Holland and Elder Kearing talk about this, that it doesn't matter how dark a spot you're in, Christ is always there looking to try and bring you out. He's never given up on you. He's never given up on me. He just won't. He just doesn't. He's always there. And why he chose to reach into those dark spaces for me, I don't know. I know someday I can ask him that question, and I'm sure he'll give me an answer of, you were the one that I needed in that spot to help my other child to get through these things. And I never denied Christ ever. I always knew he was there, but I wanted to run from him. I didn't want him to see me. I wanted to do it on my own. I was too headstrong. And it's an interesting thing of how, if you allow it, how the Spirit of Jesus Christ can work through you, even where you would think that there is no light, there is nothing, there's nowhere I can go. I'm lower than a whale turd, I'm down at the bottom of the ocean, and I'm the pond scum that, feeds everything else. But I would say that you're not far. I mean, the Lord and Heavenly Father, he wants you, he needs you. And that's the crux of what my life has really been. I've seen those dark places. I've been homeless. I've been in dark turmoil. I've had these miraculous miracles happen in my life where, even when I was trying to run away from the gospel of Christ, that he would show to me how much he loves me by allowing me to walk in my grandfather's footsteps, by allowing me to have these miracles, even when I didn't deserve them. Even to this day, I don't know. I in my prayers, it's like, I don't know what I did to deserve the beautiful miracles that you have given me in my life. What did I do before this life that allows me to have such a wonderful and powerful testimony of how much Christ loves us and how he is always there, blessing our lives, reaching out for us. I actually have it as a screensaver. It's a picture of Christ walking on the water, reaching down into the water to pull you up. His hand is always outstretched. It's always there if you just reach for it. And that's what happened to me when President Chastain, he was the mouthpiece for the Lord that day, that brought a sinner such as I into a life that I wouldn't trade for anything, for family, for knowing a love of a woman that, don't tell her this, but she's the best of me. I mean, I do all I can. I pray every day that I can be worthy of her, because I know how far I sunk. She is the miracle in my life. She made me a father, and I have 4 beautiful children because of her. And that's, that's truly the crux of everything that I would ever really hope that someone could see or to hear that wherever you are, God is there. Christ is there. You just have to want to listen, to reach out, let him be that light, follow it, and you will have powerful miracles in your life. They may not be as huge, grandiose things, but simple, everyday, tender mercies that if you truly look for them, you will find them. And you will be able to come back into that light that truly is almost shining like on my bald noggin.
Yeah, I got some of those too.
I mean, what a powerful testimony to know that Christ and our Heavenly Father never, and I mean never, gives up on us. They are always there. They always want us to come back. But it is our choice, our agency that he gave us. I can't imagine the suffering that he goes through on a daily basis of his wayward children. It's almost unfathomable to truly understand, being a father myself, and I'm sure you guys have children too. If I hadn't had a family, if my wife hadn't blessed me with children, I would never know such a powerful love for individuals that truly can change the course of life and your destiny and the way that you are in life. I try and go through life treating people as I want to be treated, which is odd. I go under the adage of God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you should speak. And by using that in the nursing profession, and that's something I really never talked about during this interview, of how the Lord will use the power of the Holy Spirit to touch you as a nurse or as a medical professional to save the life of someone else. There's been so many times where, of course, in nursing school, they call it your nursing intuition. They didn't want to call it anything else. They called it nursing intuition. No, it's the Holy Ghost. It's all it is. It's the Holy Ghost. And, hearing that voice, hearing those promptings, and knowing exactly what to do. I know President Nelson talked about it in some of his surgeries of, in my mind's eye, I saw exactly where I needed to cut. It happens for the medical professionals that are willing to listen to that still small voice and to save the life of others or to ease the suffering of others if you just listen. So I guess in a nutshell, that is my message of hope, that you can come out of that darkness and see the light and have that powerful feeling of light in your life. And I would say that and testify that all I have said today, to the best of my recollecting, is true. And I do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Joe, for coming on. It's really just, it's so inspiring to see that people can change, right? Like, and not that you have to go through really hard times or dark times. Like, it's not necessary all the time to go through that. But the fact that, like, knowing if you make choices that take you down that path, or if other people make choices that force you down that path, Heavenly Father He's always going to have multiple ways to pull you back and to guide you and to forgive you and to use you, right? Like, even in your darkest, hardest times, you still were able to be a vessel of light to other people, even if you weren't being your most excellent self, right? Like the best version of you that you could be. Heavenly Father can work with all of us at any point, at any time, anywhere, and half the time we don't even have to realize that he's working with us for him to still be working with us. But it always is a lot more powerful when you pay attention and, when you're able to use that to add to your testimony to build, build a stronger testimony. And I love that you did that. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
I got to tell one little story. How my father was able to, he kept saying, "Oh, I got one more. Oh, I got one more." Lovingly do this to him when he starts telling stories. And that means, "Dad, I've heard it 3 times. I don't need to hear it again." Yeah, he could sell a ketchup popsicle to an Eskimo, and the Eskimo would say, "Hey, this is the greatest thing on the world." He just has that. So,
yeah, he was awesome. Awesome.
Well, thanks again, Joe, for being on the show, and thanks everyone for tuning in to hear Joe's story. If you have a story that you'd like to share, go to latterdaylights.com and tell us about it. We can have you on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And do your 5-second missionary work, guys. Share Joe's story. You just never know who out there needs to hear it and needs to have a little more light, induced into their testimony. And so we just really appreciate all of our guests that come on here. Joe, we appreciate you for taking the time out to come and to talk to us and to really just help us fortify our own testimonies. And we're thankful for our listeners too, guys. We love you. We love hearing comments. So go ahead and comment. Let us know what really stood out to you in Joe's story. And like we said, share it with others. We would love to be able to get this out there for everybody.
Yep. So thanks again, Joe. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. And we will talk to you again next week with another episode. Thanks. See ya.
Thanks.